With the newest August update in Monster Hunter Wilds, not only did we see the addition of a whole new tier of difficulty for our endgame monsters, we also saw the introduction of RNG charms for us to grind for, but on top of all of that, we got a huge list of weapon buffs, but also buffs to plenty of skills. And chief among these, one that really stood out to me, and I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about if you saw my patch notes video, is the Mizutsune set bonus Bubbly Dance, which I have talked about previously on the channel as being incredibly powerful, though prior to this update, it had a couple of problems that prevented it from becoming a real powerhouse that would become a staple in the metagame of Monster Hunter Wilds. However, with these changes, I do believe that it has become really strong in both giving you some fantastic quality of life and defensive options, while also giving you a serious affinity boost. So with that being said, in today's video I'm going to be covering the changes that were made to this set bonus and how much better they are, as well as my updated endgame builds that feature Bubbly Dance, to give you guys a good showcase of just how much better this has become. With that being said, hello everyone, my name is Dark Hero and let's get started. So ever since Bubbly Dance was introduced in the Monster Hunter series, with Mizutsune being one of the flagship monsters in Generations, this has been one of my favorite set bonuses ever since then, because it allows you to have a completely different playstyle with your weapons that again can help you both defensively but also offensively, especially when in combination with a few key skills. So let's talk about Bubbly Dance. So as you can see here, I have the Mizutsune armor set, and by simply performing a couple of dodge rolls, I will activate Bubbly Dance. You can see it on the top left corner of the screen. I now have the buff active and I am inflicted with Bubble Blight. Now what Bubble Blight does to your hunter is it basically gives you more iframes on your dodges, which that in itself is already quite powerful. But having to dodge 2-3 times just to activate this effect can be a bit annoying, and of course is going to be a DPS loss. Well, thankfully there are plenty of weapon actions that you can perform with many different weapons that will also trigger Bubble Blight on your hunter, meaning that they basically count as a dodge. Now Bubble Blight is important because it gives more iframes to your hunter, but also because it allows you to trigger Slicked Blade, which is the key to getting more offensive power out of the Mizutsune set bonus and Bubbly Dance. That effectively gives you plus 21% affinity, and because Bubble Blight is considered a debuff, you can also stack Coalescence on top to deal even more damage. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because a really cool thing about Bubble Blight and the way that this all works with Bubbly Dance is that you don't just need to be performing these dodge rolls to trigger Bubbly Dance. In fact, there's plenty of different weapons that you can use their weapon actions, that is to say some of their attacks, that will also trigger this effect. So you don't need to be dodge roll spamming and missing out on some DPS to trigger this effect. So naturally the dodge on the dual blade is going to trigger Bubbly Dance, but one that you probably wouldn't expect is the long swords Foresight Slash, which as you can see I'm able to trigger Bubbly Dance like this, and I don't even need to be dodging an incoming attack. The Sword and Shield's backstep can also trigger this effect like this, though sadly Sliding Swipe does not trigger Bubbly Dance. Other weapons that can also trigger this effect are the hammer's Charge Step, like this, both the lance and the gun lance's sidestep after a dash or a poke, the switch axe's sidestep, as well as the Charge Blade sidestep. Surprisingly, the Insect Glaive aerial vault can also trigger this, as can the heavy bowgun sidestep and the light bowgun sidestep into slide, which actually allows you to trigger it very quickly because it counts as 2 dodges. And naturally the bow's charging sidestep will also work towards triggering Bubble Blight. So again, pretty much every weapon with the exception of the Greatsword and the Hunting Horn all have ways to be able to trigger this effect very easily without necessarily you simply spamming the dodge roll button. Now having said that, despite the additional 21% affinity, the additional iframes and being able to trigger this effect so easily with many weapons, the reason why Bubbly Dance never really became a staple in the endgame of Monster Hunter Wilds is because of its requirements. Prior to the August update, Bubbly Dance 1 would not apply Bubble Blight on your hunter after doing this dodge several times. You would need to have Bubbly Dance 2, aka the 4-piece set bonus, to get that effect. And simply put, many of the Mizutsune armor pieces really aren't that great. A couple of them are actually quite powerful and very efficient, but the rest of the pieces really aren't that good, so when you are competing with the endgame sets, especially something like the Gormagala set, for example, that allows you to have the 2-piece set bonus Black Eclipse 1, that when coupled with Antivirus 3, which you can very easily add onto your build, that alone can give you a 25% affinity to your build very easily. It was just very hard to justify putting on 4 pieces from the Mizutsune set just to get 21% affinity and a couple more iframes. However, thankfully, as of the August update, Bubbly Dance 1, the 2-piece set bonus, will now actually apply Bubble Blight on your hunter. So now we have a lot more freedom when it comes to making our build, and this makes the Mizutsune set bonus a lot more viable, and in my opinion it's actually fantastic now. And if you want to go for Bubbly Dance 2 after the patch, you are still of course affected by Bubble Blight, but on top of that you also get some additional iframes. Now it's very hard to measure the amount of iframes that you get with this, so I'm not really going to delve deep into that, but this small change has made this set bonus much better in my opinion, and moving forward I'm going to have it on so many of my builds. Now before I show you my updated endgame builds that have Bubbly Dance 1, let's talk about that 21% affinity that I mentioned before. Slick Blade 3 is a skill that can be found on all of the Mizutsune weapons that again gives you 21% affinity when inflicted with Bubble Blight, and given that all of the Mizutsune weapons, on top of looking fantastic, come with 15% innate affinity, you effectively have 36% affinity on your weapon right from the get-go. Additionally, these weapons are actually quite good by themselves. They have 210 raw attack, which is actually quite competitive with a lot of the Arcane weapons, as most of them are going to range from 210 to 220 on average, and on top of that they have 50 units of white sharpness, meaning that a lot of times you'll be able to forego of any sharpening skills on your weapon, and you can instead use those decoration slots to add skills like crit boost, crit element, so on and so forth, allowing you to deal even more damage. They also have a range from very decent to very good elemental damage values. As you can see, this longsword has 300 water attack, while the dual blades only have 190 and the sword and shield 230. And you also get some really good decoration slots, not as amazing as the Arcane weapons of course, but it's again quite competitive. Not to mention that you get critical element level 1 on all of the Mizutsune weapons. So with the builds that I'm about to show you, the goal is to combine some of these Mizutsune weapons, preferably weapons that can trigger the effect Bubbly Dance very easily and naturally through their gameplay loop, to maintain a very good uptime on Slicked Blade to get that additional affinity and also more iframes, so you can maintain it active for a longer period of time. It's a very simple loop that allows you to deal a lot more damage and become a lot more aggressive, as dodging will be easier than ever. So I'm actually going to be showing you 2 different build variations, and these builds will be made without the RNG charms, so everyone is able to just copy them and use them, though I will mention some better charms that you can use if you are lucky and get some of these RNG charms whenever is the case. And also keep in mind that all of these builds are going to work for all of the weapons that I listed before that are able to trigger Bubbly Dance with various different attacks, though naturally some weapons are going to take better advantage of this than some others. So with the first build that I have for you, I decided to take advantage of the 2-piece Gormagala as well as the 2-piece Mizutsune set bonus. So the idea here is to get a lot of affinity out of these armor pieces without even adding decorations. So I have the Gormagala Helm Beta, the Mizutsune Mail Alpha, the Guardian Arcval Vambraces Beta, the Gormagala Coil Beta, the Mizutsune Greaves Beta, and lastly an Exploiter Charm. I then added 1 Tenderizer Jewel, 3 Sane Jewels, 2 Counterattack Jewels, and 1 Jumping Jewel, and we end up with Weakness Exploit 5, which is going to give you 30 to 20% affinity, that combined with Antivirus, and Black Eclipse 1, which by themselves will give you 25% affinity, and then we add the 21% affinity from Slicked Blade and a base 15% affinity of the weapon. We're looking at having 91% affinity without even taking into account the additional 20% affinity you have whenever you hit a wound with Weakness Exploit. So we are going to be critting quite often with this build. You don't have to worry about not landing crits, which is naturally going to allow our weapons damage to skyrocket and be a lot more consistent. Burst level 4 will give us a huge amount of damage, especially with weapons that are able to maintain uptime on the monster very easily. So if you're using a longsword, sword and shield, dual blades, light bowgun, bow, switch axe, a lot of the faster weapons, this is going to give you a huge damage boost. That is going to be further compounded by having Adrenaline Rush level 2, so you get a massive 15 attack increase whenever you perfectly dodge an attack. This attack boost only lasts for 15 seconds, but with with how often we're going to be able to dodge attacks, you'll be able to maintain a very good uptime on this very easily, so that is quite good. We also get Constitution level 3, so maintaining our stamina is going to be quite easy. Evade Window level 1 is going to give us some additional iframes, and I added the Jumping Jewel to get Evade Extender level 1 because I think it is very powerful on a lot of weapons, though naturally if you're using something like the Longsword for example, you may want to replace this with Counter-Strike or Coalescence. That said, I really like Evade Extender on pretty much any weapon. If you want to try to dodge an attack, I do believe it makes it feel a lot more consistent, so that is why I added it. And speaking of Coalescence, we also get one level of Coalescence that is going to work really amazing in this build because it's going to trigger whenever we recover from having not only Bubble Blight, but also when we recover from the Gormagala Frenzy effect. So we have two different debuffs that are going to be active at all times ideally, which is going to allow Coalescence to trigger more often and therefore give us more damage. Now these two level 1 decoration slots, you can really put anything you want here. You can go for Divine Blessing level 2, hell if you want you can go for Constitution level 5, or my preferred option going for Recovery up level 2, so that whenever you drink a Mega Potion you simply top up a little bit quicker, or if you only use Max Potions then going for Recovery Speed, so you can recover the red portion of your health a little bit quicker. And then for your weapon, because we have this much affinity on our build, honestly just going stupid with damage here is the best way to go about it, unless you have a weapon like the Sword and Shield for example, where you want to go for Offensive Guard or some other specific skill. Going for Crit Boost 5 and Attack level 1 is going to give you 3 additional raw attack and will increase your critical damage from 25 to 40%, allowing you to deal just a lot more damage. This is how I would go about it, though you can naturally also add Water Attack level 3 if you want to, though from my experience I do believe that going raw is going to be better for most of the matchups. That said, as I mentioned before, depending on the charm that you have, you can potentially go for something like this that has Critical Eye and Evade Window, or Critical Eye 3 and Maximum Might, which with the amount of Constitution we have, you're going to be spending very little stamina, so Maximum Might is going to have a very good uptime. So you can change these around depending on the charm that you have, but always make sure that you have above an 80% affinity if possible. Now my second build variation is still going to be quite similar, though because we might be dipping into too much affinity with our first build, this one is actually going to forego a little bit of extra affinity in favor of more raw attack. So as you can see, I instead went for the Numinous Crown beta from Zoshia, the Mizutsune Male beta, the Gore Vambraces beta and Gore Coil beta to get again the Gormagala 2-piece set bonus, and once again the Mizutsune Greaves beta, but this time around I'm going for the Challenger charm to get Agitator. This is because the Numinous Crown is going to give us Agitator level 1, and then I'm going to add 2 Challenger Jewels to get Agitator level 5. I'm also going to add 3 Saint Jewels to once again get Antivirus level 3, 2 Evasion Jewels and 2 Jumping Jewels to get Evade Window 3 and Evade Extender 2, though if that sounds too much you can always remove them and get Counter-Strike level 3, so if you feel like you don't need the extra iframes, having Counter-Strike 3 is going to be the better option because, as I explained many times before on the channel, Counter-Strike is one of the best offensive skills in the entire game, giving you 25 raw attack, which is an insane amount for 45 seconds whenever you are hit by an attack that would knock you back. But if you perform a focus strike at the right time just as you are about to be hit, you still get the benefit without being knocked back and you get a massive attack increase. Now this time around we don't have Burst level 4, we have Burst level 3, which is still a very big damage bonus, and Adrenaline Rush level 1 to give us 10 raw attack whenever we dodge an attack. Now the difference between Agitator and Weakness Exploit is naturally that for one, Agitator relies on the monster being enraged, but if you are playing well, the monster is going to be enraged about 90% of the time, so it's really not difficult to have a good uptime on the skill. And you also always want to have the monster enraged naturally because they just take more damage when they are enraged, but the key difference here is that you get a 20 raw attack increase whenever the monster is enraged and a 15% affinity increase, so half of what you would get from Weakness Exploit 5. That said, with this build as is, by combining the 25% affinity from Black Eclipse and Antivirus 3 with the 36% affinity from Slick Blade and a Mizutsune weapon default affinity, with the 15% affinity from Agitator, we get a total of 76% affinity. Now granted, that is not an ideal amount of affinity, which is why in this case I would actually recommend you to slot in at the very least one level of Expert into your decoration, which is gonna give you 4% affinity, and in this specific case, it would be even more beneficial to look out for any RNG charm that you may have that is going to give you even more affinity. So again, this one that gives me critical eye 3 and maximum might 1 would be a really good option. I would essentially be reducing agitator to level 3, which still gives me a 12 raw attack increase, which is quite powerful, but now I would have a lot more affinity to make up for it. Namely, I would have 92% affinity with this build if I were to use this charm, without even taking into account maximum might, which would put me at over 100%. So ultimately, with the RNG charms, you really have a lot of options when finalizing the build, but the key idea here is that you are able to get a ton of affinity and a lot of raw attack by getting all of these pieces together. I've been having a lot of success with this build, and it really has become one of my favorites to use. So if you have a different build using the Mizutsune Bubbly dance, let me know in the comment section below, as I really want to give it a try, and if I like it, I'll make sure to highlight it in the comment section so other players can also see it. I'm very happy that Capcom did this, because this is exactly the change that I asked for when Mizutsune initially released and when I made that video, and I hope the developers make more changes like this that make the game more enjoyable and allow you to experiment with a lot more playstyles. With that being said, please leave a like on the video if you guys have enjoyed it, and do subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. With that being said, my name is Dark Hero, thank you all so much for watching, and as always, happy hunting!